In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. Come on. Take a look at the record.
You know, I've been critical of you. I have a few things I want to talk to you about today.
I know you have. Yeah. You don't know me.
No, I don't. That's why I want to get to know you today. I want to talk to you about mostly black stuff.
I get overwhelming support from the black leadership, young and old. Every poll shows me way ahead.
And black people saved your political life in the primaries this year. They have things they want from you, and one of them is a black woman running mate. What do you say to them?
What I say to them is that I'm not acknowledging anybody who is being considered, but I guarantee you there are multiple black women being considered. We've seen it more clearly now. In a black majority county, they're 6 times more likely to die in the pandemic than a white county. They're disproportionately uninsured in the African-American community, disproportionately make up the essential jobs that they can't do at home. They're risking their lives every day. Enough's enough.
What's something that you always carry with you?
Hot sauce.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Are you getting information right now?
Hot sauce.
Hot sauce in my bag, Swag?
Hot sauce.
Really?
Yes.
Now, listen, I just want you to know, people are going to see this and say, okay, she's pandering to black people again.
Okay.
The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Recording from smack dab in the middle of this magic circle here on the floor of Stigmata Studios in the heart of the Steel City. I'm working on my final details of the upcoming Water of the Art operation. I'm crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. I am John, and this is the Abracast. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different this evening. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind everybody, Abracast tarot cards are now available. Check the website out. It is Magician Sticker May, the Magician sticker of the Abracast tarot cards. It's an exclusive sticker. The only place you can get it is if you hit up the $5 or $10 tier of Patreon and or Subscribestar. And the Water of the Art operation is coming right up. It's right around the corner. If you want in on that, visit the website, figure out how to get some dope ass wizard water. So a lot of people have jumped on. I guess there's a god named Charlemagne out there that's running around interviewing Joe Biden, and Joe said some pretty crazy racial things, and we did a long episode regarding Joe Biden and just the level of corruption that follows him wherever he goes. You can look on the feature topic link and find that. And honestly, I thought that I was going to be able to ease off Joe. The reason is because I'm not even sure he's going to be the nominee. I can't see how he is. So everyone that's like, oh, Christ, it's going to be all about politics. And no, but it is about a politician. This is about the media. And this is how, instead of fake news or the media manipulating a story, I think we are going to get into a little bit of that too. It's the media's total forgetfulness of issues, whether it's turning a blind eye on purpose or just, following this thing that they have they just don't have any legitimate intellectual curiosity or remember anything that happened, And this is also, for people that are turned off at politics right now, that's fine. You might want to just skip this one. Like I said, it's not political. I'm looking at this more of like a media thing. However, it is about a politician and his insanely public things. And this isn't going to be like, oh, Joe made a gaffe. This is about Joe and I don't want to say Joe in his politics of race. So, I don't know what's in anybody's heart. So I can't go like Joe's a racist or anything like that. I don't know if it's obviously clear that he's in some form of dementia right now. However, with all that being said, if you want to skip this episode, it's a great place to skip it. It's a Wednesday episode. It's easily deletable in your, you could just jump right to the next episode or whatever. There's also going to be a little bit of Hillary and Bill Clinton stuff in here, and they are no stranger to the show either. You go on the feature topic links and find I believe there's a whole section on the Clintons in there. So, like I said, if, you're like, I don't want to hear this, I don't want to hear any of this, that's fine. I'm not trying to sway anybody's politics. Like I'm saying, this is about the media and people's short, memories, attention spans, whatever. So a lot of this stuff is going to be off of YouTube, and a lot of it's going to be some reading. Instead of including all these links in the show notes, I'll just shout out the reading parts, and the rest of it's pretty easy to find on the YouTube. So again, a lot of people call Joe like a gaffe machine, like he just says stupid things. We are going to get into some of the stupid things he says, but what actually I'm going to show is that there is a total pattern of legislation and action that shows Joe's willingness to, I don't know, I'll let you, I try not to be like, call a racist, because like I said, I don't know what's in the guy's heart, but look, we're going to hear this, in this clip, in the next clip, we're going to hear, he both claims to be marching a civil rights movement, and then he claims not to have marched in the civil rights movement. And we know that he didn't march in the civil rights movement. And then we're going to get into some really funny recent stuff. But this is an older these clips are older, but and a lot of this is from C-SPAN, 1987. But it's in a newer clip from The Intercept from just this February.
When I marched in the civil rights movement, I did not march with a 12-point program. I marched with tens of thousands of others to change attitudes. And we changed attitudes.
In 1987, Joe Biden claimed that he marched in the civil rights movement.
When I was 17 years old, like many of you, I participated in sit-ins to desegregate the restaurants and movie houses of Wilmington, Delaware.
I came out of the civil rights movement. I was one of those guys that sat in and marched and all that stuff.
A few months later, Biden disavowed the claim right before dropping out of the presidential race.
During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved. In what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I'm in my own city.
Decades later, during the Obama era, the more recently on the campaign trail, he started making the same claims again.
You know, when I was a teenager in Delaware, for real, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We have the 8th largest black population in America. Most people don't know that.
This is just so silly.
And I'd go to 8 o'clock Mass, then I'd go to Reverend Herring's church where we'd meet in order to organize and figure where we were going to go, whether we were going to desegregate the Rialto movie theater or what we were going to do. I got my education for real in the black church. And that's not hyperbole, it's a fact. But I got my education, Reverend Doc, in the black church. Not a joke. Because when we used to get organized on Sundays to go out and desegregate movie theaters and things like that, we do it through the black church. I was no big shakes, Reverend, in the civil rights movement. I was just a kid. I got involved in desegregated movie theaters and helping, you may remember Reverend Moyer in Delaware and Herman Holloway organized voter registration drives, coming out of black churches on Sunday, figuring how we were going to move. In October, I was invited to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis to receive the Freedom Award. A thing when I sat in black churches on the east side of Wilmington getting ready to, and by the way, next to two Jewish rabbis, getting ready to go out and desegregate movie theaters in Delaware. I never, ever thought in my life I would be worthy of, and I'm still not sure I'm worthy of it.
All right, I'm going to go a little bit out of order here because I just found some funny stuff. So this is CNN, okay? So you probably understand what I think about media bias. So look, this is CNN. It's from an article called, what's it fucking called? Letters from Joe Biden reveal how he sought the support of segregationists in the fight against busing. So this fight against busing, if you were paying attention to the debates, he and Kamala Harris got into it. This is like the one like major blow that one major like stone cold stunner that she did before she dropped out, right? And so the reason I'm kind of jumping ahead in my plan here is because he made such a big deal about being like, we were working on desegregating the Rialto movie theater and all of this stuff. So when this busing thing is complicated, there's a lot of moving parts, and I understand it scooched. Politics has veered wildly to the left. But here we have Joe Biden. He was representing Delaware at the time of this busing debate, and this is the reason we're talking about this is because he's talking about how big of a deal he was when he was working at desegregating movie theaters in Wilmington, Delaware. In a series of never before published letters from Biden, which we reviewed here by CNN, the strength of his opposition to busing comes into sharper focus, particularly how he followed the lead of and sought support from some of the Senate's most fervent segregationists. My bill strikes at the heart of the injustice of court-ordered busing. It prohibits the federal courts from disrupting our education system in the name of the Constitution. There is no evidence that the government officials intended to discriminate, unquote, Biden wrote to his fellow senators March 25th, 1977. I believe there is a growing sentiment in the Congress to curb unnecessary busing. So Biden, at the time, was 34. He was serving his first term in the Senate, repeatedly asked for and received the support of Senator James Eastland, a Mississippi Democrat and chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and a leading symbol of the Southern resistance to desegregation. Eastland, this is a Southern Democrat thing. This is the Ku Klux Klan are Democrats, everybody. The Bull Connor was a Democrat. Eastland frequently spoke of blacks as a, quote, an inferior race, unquote. Dear Mr. Chairman, Biden wrote June 30th, 1977. Oh, this is right after Star Wars came out. I want you to know that I very much appreciate your help during this week's committee meeting in an attempt to bring my anti-busing legislation to a vote. 2 years later, Biden followed up with a note to Eastland to thank you again for your efforts to support my bill to limit court order busing. My rant and my screed and my point here is not to debate busing. It's not even to give you my opinion on busing. Literally, I don't even have one. I'm pointing out that Joe Biden has alliances with desegregationists, all the while touting that he worked for segregation in the Rialto movie theater and other places around Eastern Delaware or whatever. Biden would go on to lead the Judiciary Committee. A decade later, he got his start on the panel under Eastland. A few senators were more virulently outspoken against the desegregation than the Mississippi senator who was known for his incendiary floor speeches on race. Yet Biden invited Eastland to speak on the Senate floor in support of his anti-busing bill. I want to personally ask your continued support and alert you to our intentions, Biden wrote on August 22nd, 1978. Your participation in floor debates would be welcome. The letters, which were filed away in Eastland's archives in the University of Mississippi, offer a window into the robust nature of Biden's support of anti-busing bills. While most of Biden's legislative efforts failed, not the big one. We're going to be talking about the big boy later. He really fucked himself. Who is not a passive observer like many of the fellow Democrats of his era who sought to balance the anger of white constituents surrounding school busing without blocking the next step in expansion for civil rights. Okay, so that's the big busing deal. And here I found this thing, and this is about Biden and Kamala Harris's debate here. This is from WAPO.
2020 presidential candidates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are rehashing a decades-old debate about busing as a means to integrate public schools. It started with a back and forth between the former vice president and the California senator during the first 2020 Democratic primary debate. Harris went after Biden for his record on busing during his time serving as a senator in the 1970s.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No,
do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America.
At the time, Biden generally did not support busing, while he still prided himself as a champion of civil rights.
I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I'm in my own city.
But following his debate clash with Harris, he clarified that he supported voluntary or court-mandated busing in specific cases, while he opposed involuntary busing.
I never opposed voluntary busing. Number one, I was for busing where the court showed that, in fact, a legislative body took an action preventing black folks from going to a school. That is de jure, I know you know, de jure segregation. The difficult piece is, this is 50 years ago, people don't understand the context. The third one is, do you have an administration through their non-elected officials, the Department of Housing, decide every school should be equally balanced across the board?
Meanwhile, Harris has been very clear that she supported busing as mandated by the federal government in the 70s. And for her, the debate is very personal.
Again, this is not defending busing. It's not supporting busing. I'm just pointing out there's a racial element to this busing debate. And Joe Plugs Biden felt so strong about it, he was reaching out to racists. I find it okay to call a segregationist a racist. That's okay in my book. because he's letting you know where he stands, right? So Joe's reaching out into this alliance with these racist Democrat politicians down in Mississippi or whatever. And so, like I said, I'm not for it, against it. I'm just pointing out there's a racial component to it, and Joe Biden was okay with using his relationship, building upon his relationship with racist politicians to further his agenda one way or the other. But we'll give Mistress got her Harris here the equal time on the program.
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
However, her position on busing now is less clear.
Busing is a tool among many that should be considered when we address the issue, which is a very current issue as well as a past issue, of desegregation in America's schools. So I think of busing as being in the toolbox of what is available and what can be used for the goal of desegregating America's schools.
All right, okay, enough of that. Okay, so we've heard Plugs talk here a little bit about this pool that he worked at. So apparently Joe Biden's only ever had two jobs. He worked he was a lifeguard at a swimming pool in Delaware, and then he got into politics. So this is the guy that's going to be steering the course of the free world if he wins. This was the guy who was one heartbeat away from steering the free world in the prior 2 terms of the prior administration. So, apparently the swimming pool that he used to work at was in a bad part of town. Apparently it still is in a bad part of town in Delaware. And they recently renamed the swimming pool after Joe, and he goes on and he does a lot of talking here on this. He talks about he's going to fight this gang leader who's got straight razors. He's going to tell I'm going to stop trying. He's going to go on to tell a couple of crazy stories all on the same day here while he's talking at this dedication of this public pool. So everything that they talk about here, though, is they omit the idea that the school's in a bad part of town, quote, an urban area. It's an African-American neighborhood, and it was even back then. And when you watch the video, you can see he's surrounded by these black kids. They got all these black kids out of the pool. They surrounded him, and he starts telling these stories. But whenever you hear people talk about this, it's all about how weird his leg hair was or something. And they're not no one puts the point on it that he's talking about black children here. And with this pomade business with the straight razors and stuff, he's talking about black dudes. He's talking about black dudes. He was a white lifeguard here. So let me know if that gets through to you without me saying it. Maybe I should have saved all this to the end of it or whatever. So this is the reason I'm bringing this up, is because we're examining the pattern. Okay. And this story sounds crazy, but apparently they found this guy and he exists, this dude that Joe's about to tell this story about. Okay, here we go. Here is the battle for Wilmington, Delaware. Joe Biden versus the gang leader Corn Pop. I can't even make it up.
I learned a lot, and I learned that it makes a difference. This was the diving board area, and I was one of the guards, and there was a 3-meter board. If you fell off sideways, you landed on the darn cement over there. And Corn Pop was a bad dude, and he ran a bunch of bad boys. And I did. And back in those days, to show how things have changed, one of the things you had to use, if you use pomade.
Okay. The whole story sounds made up, but apparently it's for real. I don't know. I didn't get into it. But you just think of this bad dude that runs some bad boys with straight razors and shit that we're about to hear about. What's he doing hanging out in a pool? Like, doesn't he got moves to make? Isn't he a hustler, baby? Doesn't he want you to know? Anyhow, Joe Biden says this bad dude who runs Bad Boys, he's doing illegal dives off the board because he doesn't have a swim cap on his pomade.
Pomade in your hair, you had to wear a bathing cap. And so he was up on the board, wouldn't listen to me. I said, hey, Esther, you, off the board, or I'll come up and drag you off. Well, he came off, and he said, I'll meet you outside. My car, these were all public housing behind it. My car, there was a gate out here. I parked my car outside the gate. And he said, I'll be waiting for you. He was waiting for 3 guys in straight razors. Not a joke. There's a guy named Bill Wright, Mouse, the only white guy, and he did all the pools. He was the mechanic. And I said, what am I going to do? He said, come down here in the basement where mechanics, where all the pool filter is. You know the chain, there used to be a chain that went across the deep end. And he cut off a 6-foot length of chain. He folded up, he said, you walk out with that chain. And you walk to the car and say, you may cut me, man, but I'm going to wrap this chain around your head. I said, you kidding me? He said, no, if you don't come back. And he was right. So I walked out with the chain.
Can you believe that? Have you heard this stuff before?
And I walked up to my car. And in those days, you used to remember the straight razor. You'd bang them on the curb, get them rusty, put them in the rain barrel, get them rusty. And I looked at him, but I was smart then. I said, first of all, I said, when I tell you get off the board, you get off the board, and I'll kick you out again, but I shouldn't have called you Esther Williams. I apologize for that. I apologize, but I didn't know that apology was going to work. He said, you apologize to me? I said, I apologize for that, not for throwing you out, but I apologize for what I said. He said, okay, close the straight razor, and my heart began to beat again.
Okay, so this is later in the same speech, and this is funny, and it's one of the things that some people talk about, but I would like you to keep in mind that he's talking about a pool full of black kids. He's talking about a pool full of African-American kids. This is the exact same speech. So he just got done talking about how he and Bill Wright or whatever were the only white guys, and Bill Wright was the only white guy that worked in all the pools. So this clip doesn't necessarily say like all these black kids are rubbing my legs or jumping on my lap, but he is talking about kids jumping on his lap and rubbing his legs, and he's talking about it's so bizarre. This speech actually took place June 26, 2017. Okay, so this is weird. If you've never heard this story or heard this clip before, I'm sorry, but it's so bizarre.
By the way, you know, I sit on the stand and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Roaches? I love kids jumping on my lap. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. And then there's this thing from 2006 where I don't even know. I mean, I guess this doesn't even have a place here, but I'm just going to play it because it's so stupid. Joe Biden's talking about, I'm not going to play it. You hear this anywhere. Everybody knows about this one. He was talking about the Dunkin' Donuts. He's like, you can't even, in Delaware, you can't even go into a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have an Indian accent. I mean, you can find that one anywhere. Okay, so here he gets called out. This is, I believe this, was when he was running for president. I think he might have been running against Obama at this point. I don't know. Anyhow, he had said a bunch of crazy shit, as he always does. But one of the craziest shits that he said was, and they don't even really go over it. They just like, what, that shit that you said about Obama. And what he had said about Obama is he was like, you know, we have a clean, it's just like what racists say about black people, right? He's clean. He's articulate. He'll make a real good candidate. So this goes to the thing, but there's a little bit more chewier stuff here too. So we'll play the whole bit. This was from Iowa Public Television, PBS. That's right, everybody. Presidential debates for the Des Moines Register.
Your campaign have had a number of occasions to correct or clarify things you've said relating to race, including your remarks about Senator Obama being, quote, clean and articulate, your comment about Indians working at 7-Eleven, and recently to the Washington Post in which you spoke about race while describing disparities between schools in Washington, D.C. and Iowa. Do these gaffes or misunderstandings, or however you would characterize them, indicate you're uncomfortable talking about race, or are people just being too sensitive?
I think that I have my whole career. I got involved in public policy. I got involved in politics because of the civil rights movement. It's the overwhelming core of my support in my home state. I get the overwhelming majority, over 95% of the vote of minorities in my state. I may have phrased those things wrongly, but when I talked about the Indian population, what I was making the point was they're building families. They're coming by businesses, 7-Elevens and Dunkin' Donuts and small shops, just like those Italian immigrants used to do, and they're building families. The point I was making about the inner city of Washington is the point that Barack just made. Barack made the point, he said that minorities start off at a disadvantage. They start off with a gap, an achievement gap that exists before they even walk into school, minorities. And so I was making the same point. It may be possible because I speak so bluntly that people misunderstand, but no one who knows me in my state, no one who I've worked with in the United States Congress has ever wondered about my commitment to civil rights and civil liberties.
Do you think that's true? Do you think back in 1977 when he was reaching out to segregationists, they were like, yeah, no, I don't have any problem. I know exactly what side of his fucking bread is buttered. Do you think that is a true statement?
And if you take a look at my record as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, of the Judiciary Committee, ranking member, chairman for 16 years, starting with the Voting Rights Act and worked its way through to voting against constitutional amendments on busing when busing was taking place in my state. My credentials are as good as anyone who's ever run for president of the United States on civil rights.
Here. Senator Obama.
I just wanted to. I just want to make the comment. I've worked with Joe Biden. I've seen his leadership. I have absolutely no doubt about what is in his heart and the commitment that he's made with respect to racial equality in this country. So.
Maybe I should have played this towards the end because I'm working my way up. It's like Jaws. Dun, 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 dun. We're working our way up to this Violent Crimes Act in 1994. I should have played this towards the end because this is a ludicrous statement that he's about to make.
I will provide some testimony, as they say in church, that Joe is on the right side of the issues and is fighting every day for a better America.
Thank you.
All right. So what's next? Let's move to this next bit. All right. So this is him. This is him. You know, when Hillary was running, one of the times Hillary was running and she's like, I ain't no way tired. Like she's speaking in a black church and she's like, I ain't no ways tired. And she like just starts like blindly, nakedly pandering to the black congregation. Now, I found this, and I'm not saying I found it, like I had to dig for it, like it's out there. Like I just remembered something about like, oh yeah, I should look for this one too. Here it is.
Look at what they value and look at their budget and what they're proposing. Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
They're going to put you all back in chains. All right, what's the next thing? So this is Wolf Blitzer on CNN. August 15th, 2012. And he's got this guy, Arthur Davis, who is a former 4-term Democratic congressman who has, he's had enough. This speech by Joe Biden that we just heard that clip from has driven him bananas, and he's about to lay it out. Here we go. This is Arthur Davis, 4-term Democratic congressman.
What was the one or two issues that most disappointed you or surprised you as far as President Obama is concerned and caused you to leave his side?
Wolf, I have to tell you, I don't have to go any further than 24 hours ago. When I heard the Vice President of the United States, someone I grew up admiring, someone I've been on platforms with, when I heard him go to Danville, Virginia, and talk about politics in a way that no serious candidate ought to talk about it, when I heard him reach the bottom of the deck and talk about one party putting people in chains, when I heard someone that I admired and have been on platforms with talk about ordinary conservative principles as being essentially racial viciousness, because that's the allegation he was making yesterday, I was disappointed by it, but I have to tell you, it brought back memories to me. It brought back memories of these Democratic politicians in the South who think they can go before black crowds and say one thing, that nobody else will hear it, and that they can somehow get a cheer in the room, and that they can blithely go on about their business. That's not the way you can do politics anymore because of the media, and I think Vice President Biden, I hope Vice President Biden learned an important lesson. You can't say one thing to a certain kind of people thinking nobody else is hearing you.
Well, there were TV cameras there. I assume he knew that everyone would be watching an event like this. It wasn't just simply a closed-door event, but what the campaign, the Obama campaign, says is he was simply referring to what Republicans have said, that they want to, quote, unshackle big business in the United States and get rid of many of the regulations, and he was responding to that. Does that make sense to you?
Wolf, I know that's the spin and it's creative. I'll give them credit for creativity, but I happen to have spoken to a few African-American audiences in my time, represent a predominantly African-American district. I know what Joe Biden was doing yesterday, and every black person in that room knew who the y'all was. They knew what the chains were about. They knew what the metaphor was, and I will give that audience credit. If you listen to a tape of that audience, you actually hear what appear to be boos or what appears to be shock from some people in that audience. That says a lot that is very good about people in that audience, that when Joe Biden went to a place he never should have gone, that instead of getting the cheers he just knew he'd get, he got a negative reaction from a lot of the African Americans in the room. That doesn't lift up Joe Biden or excuse his comments, but it says something positive about the people in that audience.
Well, let me just be precise before we move on. What are you saying that this represents, this underscores, as far as the vice president is concerned?
It's a divisive tactic that's insulting to African Americans. It's insulting to the American people. It's an insult to the legacy that he used to build up as an orator who knew how to inspire people instead of strike fear in people's hearts. And it ought to embarrass President Obama. President Obama has taught so movingly about our country moving beyond race, and his own vice president makes this kind of comment yesterday.
All right,
it was
whatever.
Wrong.
Okay,
and
we're going off
to
into
be embarrassed by it. And
we're going off. Okay, we're going off the rails. All right, I gotta stay focused. What's the next thing we're going to watch? This is, here's something that he had said. I believe this was this was just recently. Oh, here's a good one. This was just recently. And then we're going to do this one, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to do deep dive, 1994 dive. We're going to jump in the DeLorean and head to 1994 to see the train wreck that is what's happened to Joe Biden. Here we go.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it, but think how we think about it. We think, no, we're going to dumb it down. They can do anything anybody else can do, given a shot. The reason we're the country we are is we're a nation of immigrants. It's not an exact. This is not because I'm standing with you. but it's a fact. It's a fact. We've been able to cherry pick the single best of every single solitary culture in the world, from every continent in the world. That's why we're who we are. Because to get up and decide to come to the United States, whether it was 200 years ago or 2 days ago, takes a whole heck of a lot of courage, takes a lot of resilience, takes a lot of determination.
Oh.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
All right, we're talking about the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. HR 3355 Pub L 103 to 322 is an act of Congress. This is according to whenever I do Wikipedia, I always am like full disclosure, but this one sounds pretty legit. Dealing with crime in law enforcement, it became law in 1994. It is the largest crime bill in the history of the United States and consisted of 356 pages that provided for 100,000 new police officers, $9.7 billion. That's chump change nowadays when you're talking about laws. In funding here. Oh, I need to do this again because I need to add the proper respect. $9.7 billion in funding for prisons and $6.1 billion in funding prevention programs, which were designed with significant input from experienced police officers. This was sponsored by Representative Jack Brooks of Texas. The bill was originally written by Senator Joe Biden of Delaware, and then it was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. So no one's talking about this. No one's talking about this. And you're like, but did Joe Biden really write this thing? Of course not. These idiots don't write their own laws. They have lobbyists that write their laws, and they're like, here, this is what you're going to submit. But this was his deal. This was Senator Joe Biden of Delaware's deal, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Later on, we're going to encounter articles and video clips that just say that Joe just helped write it. He just helped write it. His name is on the fucking thing. Following the 101 California street shooting and the Waco siege, like the Waco siege was all about street crime, like we're going to hear. I've done an episode about Waco before it was cool to do episodes about Waco. You can head over to the feature topic link on the abracast.com to find it. The other high profile instances of violent crime, the act expanded federal law in several ways. One of the most noted sections is the federal assault weapons ban. Now, seriously, the only reason I know this is because I know Bill Clinton signed this assault weapons ban. That's it. And then I started looking at it over the years, and I'm like, oh, it wasn't just an assault weapons ban. But we're going to get into it. Other parts of the act provided for a greatly expanded federal death penalty. New classes of individuals banned from possessing firearms, and a variety of new crimes defined in statutes relating to immigration law, hate crimes, sex crimes, and gang-related crimes. The bill only required that states established the registries of sex offenders by September 1997. So we're going to get into this thing, and it's not going to be a gigantic dissection of this, because there's probably some good and probably some bad, and I'm not falling on any side of any of this. Like, I'm not saying, we're going to give incentives we're going to give monetary incentives to states that lock up more people. We're going to give them more money. I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's not my role in this episode. I'm just saying that's what you're going to find. So if you think that dipstick Joe Biden sat down and wrote all of this stuff out, you're wrong. He didn't do it, but he championed it. We're going to listen to him champion it. And he says some pretty provocative shit when he's trying to sell it, by the way. So the one thing that I'm going to be paying attention to here, which is it? The community-oriented policing services. That's the one that I want. So crime was rampant in the 80s and 90s. Some people, I think we're going to hear this later in a clip, said that it topped off at 91. And then they passed this bill in 94 because they didn't know that it topped off in 91. I don't know. It seems like a year. It seems like 3 years to get your statistics together is enough, but whatever. Okay, community-oriented policing services. Since 1994, the COPS office has provided $30 billion in assistance to state and local law enforcement agencies to help hire policing officers. And now what do we know? What do we hear all the time is like one of the dangers of minority people are the amount of times they have contact with police officers. Here we go. The COPS office also funds the research and development and guides tools and training and provides technical assistance to police departments, implementing community policing programs. The law authorized the COPS office to hire 100,000 more police officers to patrol the nation's streets. Now, here's the next one. That's the first one I want to talk about. The next one is the Violent Offender Incarceration and Truth in Sentencing Initiative Grants Program. Listen to this. Title II of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act in 1994, written by Joe Biden, provided incentive grants to build and expand correctional facilities to qualifying states that have formed or enforced mandatory sentencing. So do you remember when, who was that? It was the Limp Bizkit for Democrats, the Limp Bizkit for communists. Who was it? System of a Down. They did this song that was like, mandatory minimum sentencing. They're bitching about Democrat stuff. They're bitching about communist stuff. Here we go. Qualifying states to enforce mandatory sentencing of 85% of a person's sentence conviction. In 1998, 27 states of the District of Columbia qualified for that federal grant program. All right. So what does that mean? What does it all mean? I don't know. We're going to fucking get into it right here. We're going to listen to Joe Biden try to sell this bill, this Violent Crime Enforcement Act, 1994, that he apparently wrote. We're going to listen to him defend it right now. Also, as we continue down this road, I just would like you to just keep in mind that this is not a pro-violent crime act or an anti-violent crime act of 1994 statement. My role here is I'm sitting on the fence. I'm not making any one way or the other. I'm just reminding people what has happened before. So here we go. This was 1993. Now okay, I'm not even going to editorialize. Okay, this is 1993. This is Joe trying to sell his shit. This bill that he wrote or helped write or just sold, whatever. Here it is.
We must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society.
Imagine a politician saying that right now on either side. Imagine it. Okay, here we go.
It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes.
Ding, ding, ding. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the future is calling you. The future is calling you.
Because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now.
Who's they?
And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society.
So, you guys that have listened to the show for a while know when we start talking politics and stuff, I do the what's called the shoes on the other foot game. Imagine if this was a Republican out here saying this. They don't have a father. They don't have a family structure. They're not integrated in society. People would be lighting themselves on fire. I posit even in the 1990s, people would have been lighting themselves on fire. But Joe's got this big red D going around his head, like if it was a Sims video game. So everybody just gives him this motherfucker a pass. Let him finish up, I guess. Here we go.
We have no choice but to take them out of society.
Take them out of society.
We don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. That's the sad truth. I'm the guy that said rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and notice it. And even when we notice it and we know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, there's the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate. But there is a consensus, and I will cease. A, we must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist, and we must deal with that.
During a campaign event in May, Joe Biden fought back against a common critique of an older item of his voting record, the 1994 crime bill. A woman asked Biden about that law and its effects on communities that were, quote, ravaged by the war on drugs and mass incarceration. But the former vice president disagreed about the impact of that legislation.
Folks, let's get something straight. 92 out of every 100 prisoners behind the bars are in a state prison, not a federal prison. This idea that the crime bill generated mass incarceration.
Hey, folks, I'm Joe Biden. I'd like to ask you to join my campaign. As I've said time and again, we're in a battle for the soul of this nation.
And welcome back. Joe Biden has released his plan to reform the nation's criminal justice system, a system critics say he helped to create.
MSNBC posted this analysis, the complex history of the controversial 1994 crime bill. When Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, this was written in 2016. When Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders take the stage Thursday in Brooklyn, the debate moderators will most certainly ask them about the 22-year-old crime bill. The issue is back in the news, and after 1994 crime bill came up at the Hillary campaign rally last week. Since then, much has been said about the legislation's effect on crime and mass incarceration. Some argue the measure, officially called the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act in 1994, led to a drop in crime. Others vehemently contend that it did not. Questions abound about its impact of mass incarceration. With millions watching Thursday, the candidates will help put the bill in context and offer their specific ideas to move criminal justice policy forward. Like most political compromises, the bill did some good and some bad, and it contributed both the crime decline and mass incarceration, but not in the way people might think. Here we go. We're entering the spin zone. First, the good. Although the crime bill was not responsible for the entire drop in crime. Remember, Wikipedia says that only Joe Biden wrote this, but okay. For the entire drop in crime, it likely helps. Not by locking people up, but by putting more cops on the streets. We've already talked about that. People say, well, if you encounter people in these neighborhoods encounter cops more often, so that puts their lives in danger. This is something that's said over and over again. Right or wrong, I'm just looking at the media of it. Provided funding for 100,000 new police officers and $14 billion in grants for community-oriented policing. For example, from 90 to 1999, the number of police officers rose 28%. All right, researchers also indicate smarter policing tactics. Blah, blah, blah. Crime had already started to decline. We've mentioned that also. Then there is the bad. Although incarceration was already rising steadily before the crime bill, several of its provisions helped increase incarceration even further. Nevertheless, this increase had little impact on America's subsequent drop in crime. From 1970 to 1994, the rate of imprisonment exploded 400%. 387 per 100,000 people from 94 to 2009. Imprisonment continued to rise, doubling. The crime bill contributed to this increase in incarceration. First, it banned 19 types of semi-automatic weapons, which we've already talked about, authorized the death penalty for dozens of existing and new federal crimes, and instituted the federal 3 strikes and you're out provision. But those facets were far less pernicious than how the crime bill influenced the states to increase their prison rolls. The bill granted states, God damn it, $12.5 billion to build prisons if they passed the Truth in Sentencing TIS laws, which required inmates to serve at least 85% of their sentences. In 2002, Urban Institute study found that between 1995 and 1999, 9 states adopted the TIS laws for the first time, and another 21 states changed their TIS laws to comply to get the money that the crime bill had required. They were making the changes to their law so they can get the money for locking people up. Think about that. Think about that. While you're sitting in quarantine right now, fucking think about that. By 1999, a total of 42 states had such laws on the books, sustaining an increase in imprisonment. The crime bill, however, was the most high-profile legislation to increase the number of people behind bars. On their own, states passed a 3-strike law, enacted mandatory minimum sentencing, eliminated paroles, and removed judicial discretion in sentencing by dangling bonus dollars. The crime bill encouraged states to remain on their tough-on-crime course. All right, here we go. We're dipping our feet all into all kinds of liberal media right now. MSNBC. Joe Biden rolls out criminal justice reform plan ahead of the second debates.
And welcome back. Joe Biden has released his plan to...
Okay, as he goes through this, I want you to remember the last speech that we listened to.
reform the nation's criminal justice system, a system critics say he helped to create. His plan would, among other things, eliminate mandatory minimum sentences, end the disparity between crack and powder cocaine, and decriminalize marijuana. Cory Booker, who is challenging Biden, blames the former vice president for creating the very system he's now trying to fix. Booker released a statement that reads in part, Joe Biden had more than 40 years to get this right. The proud architect of a failed system is not the right person to fix it.
I never thought I would say this, but here, Cory Booker.
Biden expert, he joins us now from Capitol Hill. Mike, thanks. So, well, CNN released the lineup for the next round of debates. Night 2, that's Joe Biden's night, and on stage with him there is Cory Booker. And we saw in that first debate, Kamala Harris brought up busing from the 70s, had a big moment with that. Is this Booker today saying he's going to try to do the same thing with the crime bill in the 90s at that debate?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Steve. Actually, there was a Booker campaign staffer on the night that they announced these lineups actually compared this debate to a confirmation hearing for Joe Biden, saying that's the kind of treatment they expect to be giving him. What's the old line, Steve, about why people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. So why, if you're a Democrat, do you go after Joe Biden? Because for now, he actually has a really strong lead still, despite his recent struggles among African-American voters. That's really the bedrock of his support right now. And so the Booker campaign, which obviously needs to pick up the pace if they want to compete, especially in those southern primaries, needs to go after him, needs to have a Kamala-like moment for that.
All right. Let's listen to this. This is Biden on 1994 crime bill and mass incarceration. This is from Newsy. Let's have an adult name for our news organization, please. Newsy.
In May, Joe Biden fought back against a common critique of an older item of his voting record, the 1994 crime bill. A woman asked Biden about that law and its effects on communities that were, quote, ravaged by the war on drugs and mass incarceration. But the former vice president disagreed about the impact of that legislation.
Folks, let's get something straight. 92 out of every 100 prisoners behind the bars are in a state prison, not a federal prison. This idea that the...
So remember what we just read about this bill. It gave states money to lock people up. It's not about federal prisons. What he just said was a total bullshit.
The crime bill generated mass incarceration. It did not generate mass incarceration.
So, which characterization is correct? Let's start with the bill itself. The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 overhauled federal criminal justice laws. Some notable provisions in the bill's 350-plus pages include a ban on 19 types of assault weapons, increased penalties for some immigration-related crimes, and the Violence Against Women Act. The law approved $30 billion in spending for law enforcement agencies, prisons, and crime prevention programs. But to say the legislation caused mass incarceration neglects the big picture. Our partners at PolitiFact looked at data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics that shows overall imprisonment rates started going up decades before President Bill Clinton signed that crime bill. And there's also the point Biden made. The vast majority of prisoners are in custody at the state level, not the federal level.
So Newsy's in on it. They're like, we've already talked about how the level of crime went up. If the level of crime goes up, the imprisonment's going to go up. If our judiciary stuff, if our trial stuff is working right, if crime goes up, now we can look at it, we can see it's totally inverted. However, so in 1991, as I mentioned, was like the peak. And they passed this crime bill in 1994. And we're going to hear all these liberals throwing it down later. They're going to be like, well, no one knew that it peaked. Like, we were still in its peak when they passed this amazing legislation. So Newsy's in on it. And obviously, they haven't read the bill or even read the Wikipedia about how it's the point of it was subsidizing. It was sending states money to lock people up. For some reason, they got their head wrapped around it that it's federal prisons.
92 out of every 100 prisoners behind the bars are in a state prison, not a federal prison.
Since the 1994 crime bill was signed, government numbers show about 5 to 13% of prisoners have been in federal custody. So his 92 out of 100 figure may not be exactly right, but the heart of his point is accurate. That said, some people argue the 1994 law fed into the tough-on-crime efforts of the time. It offered financial incentives to states that make prisoners serve at
fucking
least
talking
85%
about. All right, I gotta get out of
sentences.
this fucking idiot's driving me nuts. This fucking millennial. So anyhow, Bill Clinton has not become immune to this. He's actually become a target. Here, we're gonna listen to that again. This is a short clip. In 2016, he's posing with a bunch of black dudes and they're flipping gang signs, like they're doing sideway peace signs and all this stuff. And they got their hats on all wonky. And Bill Clinton's like hugging these two dudes like real tight. And in the audience, this black female has got his fucking number. Listen. My husband's still in jail because of your crimes, Bill. Now listen to what she says. Wow. So you're just like, okay, well, it's just Joe and Bill. You know, Joe wrote the law apparently and sold it, and then Bill signed it. Well, we have this clip of Hillary in 2016 defending it. And this is when I'm never going to mention this again. Okay. So in 1996, Hillary Clinton is being interviewed on C-SPAN. And remember when Joe was like, we got to get these people off the streets. I don't care about the sociological impact of how they became jerks or whatever, how they became criminals or whatever. Well, here, Hillary steps it up. And this is why I left her bit in the cold open about the hot sauce and all this, because I ain't no way scared or tired.
The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
All right, great. Sorry.
The fourth challenge is to take back our streets from crime, gangs, and drugs. And
this is how, go back and listen, this is how Biden opens his sale in 1993, the 1993 speech we heard. He goes, we must take back the streets. She opens it up. This is probably her at her most attractiveness, by the way. And I should not say it. But it's like this is her peak, is right here.
The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs.
The fact that you even have to say black lives.
The fourth challenge is to take back our streets from crime, gangs, and drugs. And we have actually been making progress on this count as a nation because of what local law enforcement officials are doing, because of what citizens and neighborhood patrols are doing. We're making some progress.
She's not saying
Much of it is related to the initiative called community policing, because we have finally gotten more police officers on the street. That was one of the goals that the president had when he pushed the crime bill that was passed in 1994. He promised 100,000 police. We're moving in that direction, but we can see it already makes a difference. Because if we have more police interacting with people, having them on the streets, we can prevent crimes. We can prevent petty crimes from turning into something worse. But we also have to have an organized effort against gangs. Just as in a previous generation we had an organized effort against the mob. We need to take these people on. They are often connected to big drug cartels. They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel. And
she's just regurgitating what Biden said 3 years earlier, right? I don't care about how they got to where they are. And I'm not, like I said, I'm a fence sitter in this. Like, wading into Democrat politics to me is just like, I'm just eating the popcorn. I'm that meme of just eating the popcorn, watching this crazy shit happen. But we have to pay attention to it. We have to pay attention to what they're saying. And I'm going to show here in a little bit the racist things that they're talking about that they're not saying is racist. You know, you hear about like people, alt-right Trump dog whistles and all this stuff. Listen, I'm telling you, here it is.
The President has asked the FBI to launch a very concerted effort against gangs everywhere. In addition to that, he has appointed a new drug czar. You probably saw him Tuesday night. He's one of the most distinguished active military generals that we have in our country. He's already proven that he knows how to interdict drugs because of his command of the South American activity on behalf of the United States. But General McCaffrey will make a big difference, and I believe it is now time for all of us to know what we can do individually to be part of this anti-crime, anti-gangs, anti-drug effort. The fifth challenge is to protect the environment.
All right, so you're like, what does all this mean? The
fact that you even have to...
Like, you're like, well, they're just saying those gangs or those people or those whatever. So, like, how are you relating that to black people? Well, here we go. I'm going to lay it out for you. Well, I'm not going to lay it out for you. I have a guest. I have a clip here that's going to lay it out for you. And here's the deal. This guy, he made a couple of good movies. Like, Friday was a really good movie. Everything after that, I wasn't really good. So he made like one good movie. However, as far as rappers go, you know, I was an NWA dude. Well, first and foremost, I was a Public Enemy dude. But, you know, on Friday nights or Saturday nights, you know, you got to get into some NWA. And when NWA kind of broke up, and Ice Cube started beefing with NWA and like the 100 miles of running and the no Vaseline, you know, just to match in a little bit of gasoline, all that stuff, that was my jam. I loved Ice Cube. And I found Ice Cube talking about the super predator comment. And so Joe Biden's talking about, we got to take the streets back. Hillary Clinton's talking about, we got to take the streets back. Joe Biden goes, we got to take the streets back from predators. Hillary's talking about, we got to take the streets back from super predators. Now, here, this is what Ice Cube has to think about, taking the streets back from super predators and who they might be.
The fact that you even have to say Black Lives Matter lets you know how bad the problem is. People who don't understand the Black Lives Matter movement need to understand. When you feel that the government is against you, who's going to be with you?
Bill Clinton was giving a speech down in Philadelphia and had a bunch of Black Lives Matter protesters came in and tried to shout him down. And they're upset. They remember back in the 90s when Hillary Clinton, running for president now, talked about gang members as super predators, and had used that kind of rhetoric to justify the notion of a lot of the tough crime policies that her husband and the Congress and all those people passed. You know, super predator, that's like the kind of stuff people used to say about the guys in NWA, right? And the culture that you guys represented. It seems crazy that we're still having this conversation in 2016.
To call your own citizens super predators is pretty harsh, and you know, and it's pretty big indictment. You know, it's just like the term thug or hoodlum. You know, it's just an easy brush to paint somebody with, and it's really not solving the problem. It's just making it worse because now you have, you know, the people or the authorities feel like, okay, now they're justified at how they treat these so-called super predators. And what is that? Who is that? I mean, specifically, who are you talking about? Because, you know, the thing back in the 80s, Daryl Gates and the LAPD, they did a war on gangs.
Right, sure.
But if I'm a black kid that's not in a gang and I have but I look like a gang member to this white officer, then it's a war on me. So that's the problem with a term like super predators.
Right.
And for some reason, the Democrats feel like they're exempt from these protests. Like, we're Democrats. Why are you talking to us like this? Go talk to the Republicans. No. Everybody's a little guilty of putting, of turning their back or passing bad legislation, and everybody should be called out on it. The fact that you...
So I'm running real long, but this is a piece from Lauren Brooke Essene, and she has written a lot. She's been very outspoken about this 1994 crime bill, and this piece we're just gonna listen to it. Remember, I'm not one way or the other. I'm the dude sitting in the theater eating the popcorn as all this is unfolding. Here we go.
5 years after the 1994 crime bill was enacted.
This is on NBC News, by the way. Okay, here we go.
We are still having conversations about the import and significance of the bill.
That 1994 crime bill, it did contribute to
Kamala
mass
Harris.
Incarceration in our country.
Mistress Harris.
It's important that people remember the context of the political environment in the early 1990s.
The other big piece of legislation on Capitol Hill tonight is the crime bill.
Now, violent crime peaked in 1991, and the drafters of the bill didn't know that in 1993 and 1994 when they were drafting and signing it. Urban areas, urban cities across the country were ravaged by crack cocaine, and Americans were afraid of crime. The 1994 crime bill was signed by President Bill Clinton. This was a pretty significant bill at the time, and President Clinton and Senator Biden at the time were right that the bill was significant.
The most significant federal effort to deal with violent crime in America that has ever been undertaken.
It was important for a Democrat at the time to be seen as taking a significant role in trying to reduce crime and violence in the United States. And at the time, the Congressional Black Caucus was part of the debate around the crime bill. And the Congressional Black Caucus didn't want every provision that was included in this bill. It became clear that the provisions in the 94 crime bill were going to be a political compromise. And so the history is much more complicated than is sometimes portrayed by the media. Now, what did the bill do? Just like a lot of political compromises, there was the good and there was the bad. For example, the bill eliminated 19 types of semi-automatic assault weapons.
That's
it
bad.
Also provided huge amounts of funding to hire cops. 100,000 cops were funded. It was about $14 million at the time.
Now, this woman, I imagine, is obviously she's some kind of crazy lefty in all this stuff. She's probably like a college professor somewhere. I don't know. I didn't do the research or whatever. But she's like, she puts putting more cops on the streets as a good thing. I find that really troubling.
For community policing. The bill
Especially because of her position.
also enacted the Violence Against Women Act that provided funding to
That's
protect
good. No one's going to
women
talk.
and victims
No one's going to say
of
that's bad.
domestic violence and crimes against women. But the most pernicious provision of the 1994 crime bill was its $12 billion that was authorized for states across the country that would enact what's called truth in sentencing laws. That funding literally paid states to increase the number of prison beds that they allocated for individuals convicted of violent crime in this country to serve 85% of their sentences behind bars. The reason that provision is so important and the reason we're still talking about it today is the federal government essentially subsidized states across the country to build more prisons. So 25 years later, the crime bill is being debated.
You stood up and used that tough on crime, phony rhetoric. That bill was a huge mistake.
That's Bill de Blasio.
No question
That's
that
Kamala
that
Harris.
Crime bill contributed to America's mass incarceration.
problem.
1994 crime bill, we had a gigantic epidemic in America of violence, particularly in African American communities. The notion was overwhelmingly supported. It was supported by the Black Caucus in the United States Senate by and large.
And the reason...
I mean, how do you unpack what he just fucking said right there? I don't know. It just seems obvious.
That the crime bill comes up so often is, today in 2019, it is hard for so many people to understand why the federal government would pay states to incarcerate more people, given the devastating consequences we know that incarceration causes. But at the time, policymakers felt the need to respond to what they felt was uncontrolled violence, and this bill was the way that policymakers, that Congress could say, or do something about it.
Violent crime and the fear it provokes are crippling our society. The crime bill before Congress gives you a chance to do something about it, a chance to be tough and smart.
We need to examine the crime bill and all of the federal bills that galvanized prison spending, that galvanized more arrest, more incarceration, and we need to look to the future. And today, the United States leads the world in terms of incarceration. In fact, if each state were its own country, 23 states would have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Any candidate running for election who's serious about criminal justice reform, who's serious about cutting the prison population by 50%, needs to take a hard look at what has worked and hasn't worked in terms of our past criminal justice policies and understand that federal funding to increase the number of beds in prisons across the country is simply not a way to create safer and healthier communities.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel.
What? NBC shitty production value right there. So I do have this thing, 3 ways the 1994 crime bill continues to hurt communities of color. And this was written last year, just about this time, May 10th of last year, from Centers of American Progress. Number 1, authorize death penalties for 60 new federal offenses. Imposed mandatory life sentences for individuals with 3 or more felony convictions. This is the 3 strikes you're out. Levied harsh new penalties for justice-involved youth. And the conclusion here is the legacy of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 continues to harm communities of color. It is past time for lawmakers to dismantle these harmful policies and enact comprehensive public safety solutions that reduce reliance on incarceration, prevent unnecessary criminalization, and eliminate the draconian laws keeping millions of Americans in prison. So, as everybody is blasting out these hilarious things that Joe Biden is saying, I am petrified that people aren't paying attention to this pattern of racial pandering and I don't want to say abuse. Should I say abuse? I don't know. Like this pattern of racial manipulation. I don't know how to guide it. I didn't really write this episode. I just got a collection of clips together and thought that I could kind of go through it and talk about it. So I hope you hung in there with me, and I hope that this stuff will add a little bit of context to what you're getting on the news or on YouTube as Biden's hiding in his basement right now, afraid to come out, blinking at the sunlight like some kind of fucking amphibious plugs animal. I don't know, but I felt like this was a huge dodge when he said all this stuff about you ain't black You know what? That's the least of the insane things that he said and done to black people. And I kind of wanted to fire back on it. So that's what I had to say. I'm sorry this is so long, and I hope you guys hung on. If you don't like this stuff, I asked you to punch out at the beginning. But if you do like it, hope maybe you'll share it or something. Here we go.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Advercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellow Craft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Advercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Advercast. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I am proud of the Advercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you can sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.